It's time to do some ultimate rankings for week 9 fantasy football. These are players you need to start in all of your fantasy leagues this week. Let's start with the running back position. Let's start with the S tier. It's a little bit bigger of an S tier this week because there's lots of pretty good matchups for these guys at the top here. Derrick Henry playing the Broncos. It's a fine matchup, but it's Derrick Henry, and he's been, unstoppable this year. Saquon Barkley has the Jags, so a really good matchup for Saquon. Obviously, Saquon has been a little bit up and down this season, but you know that when Saquon is scoring touchdowns, he's ridiculous. 26 points 2 games ago, 12 points in his last game. We expect him to have a pretty good workload
because Hurts had 3 tush pushes in that game.
It actually kind of is annoying at this point. But we definitely did know that with Saquon going there that would be a possibility. Kyren Williams is the running back 5 so far this year. He continues to impress, and this week he has the Seahawks. Seahawks have given up the 7th most points to running backs this year. So pretty good matchup for him as well. Bijan has bounced back, right? He's continued to produce. I think he's a running back 8 right now. Running back 4, actually. He jumped up after this week. This is in full point PPR leagues, though. 25, 23, and 23 in his last 3 games. You have seen him score a touchdown in each of his last 3 games. And so this week, with the matchup, you're going up against the Dallas Cowboys. And the Vegas line is one of the highest of the week with 52 points. So you think that Bijan's probably going to score another touchdown this week, and when he does, he's going to be a 20-plus point per game guy. So he's in the S tier as well. And then Alvin Kamara is going to be last. We're going to slide him into the S tier this week because he is playing the Carolina Panthers. The Vegas line for this one is 44.5, but the Carolina Panthers have given up the most points to running backs of anybody in the NFL this year. So he's set to feast. He's set to get a ton of targets and also probably has really high touchdown upside for this game. All of these guys are either dominant this year or have really good matchups. They all deserve to be in the S tier. There's no way you're not starting any of these guys, and probably the guys in the S tier or the A tier as well.
Yeah, the A tier is huge this week. It's a big boy tier. We heard all of y'all's cries for justice for Jahmyr Gibbs last week because we had him in a different tier that you weren't happy about. Look, there's the guys that are top 24 in our rankings every single week. You're starting without a shadow of a doubt. Like it's not even a question. Yeah. Kenneth Walker, Devon Achane, Joe Mixon. Like I don't even need to talk about these guys. Achane is finally back with Tua being back. He's been very productive. Obviously, when Tua is on the field, he's just got to stay healthy. He is healthy. He's going to have a good game. Joe Mixon went nuclear against the Colts. Go figure. We expected that. He's got a tougher matchup technically against the Jets, but the Jets haven't been the defense that they were when Saleh was the coach. And then you've got Breece Hall and Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor in this range as well. You got some tougher matchups here for Breece, JT, and Jacobs. The reason that's really going to be the reason that they're lower. Breece has been kind of hit or miss this season. JT been banged up, has still been productive when he's on the field. It just kind of depends, honestly, at the end of the day, who's going to be the quarterback there. Because that definitely impacts what Jonathan Taylor does on the field. Josh Jacobs has been electric the last couple of weeks. Aaron Jones is playing the Colts.
Jumping to the B tier here, you've got a guy with a really good and a guy with a really bad matchup, and then everybody in between. DeAndre Swift has a really good matchup, so he's at the top of this tier. Playing the Cardinals, 44.5 is the total points Vegas line. The Cardinals have given up the 5th most points to running backs this year, and Swift's been on a pretty good run, honestly, recently. And then J.K. Dobbins at the bottom of this tier would normally be up higher in this tier, but is playing the Cleveland Browns. Vegas line is only 42.5 points, and they've allowed the 5th least amount of points to running backs this year. So kind of polar opposites there. Everybody in between. James Cook, still been producing. You saw him actually, bounce back last week, and we were a little bit concerned the week before, but he had 28 points on the same snap share, but got more carries and then had 2 touchdowns, and obviously had some big play stuff go on in that game as well, and so that really helped his production. Playing the Dolphins, James Conner against the Bears, David Montgomery against the Packers. Well, so all of these guys you're starting in your fantasy football leagues this week.
Yeah, and then the C tier is going to be a bunch of running backs that are bell cows, but they just don't have the production upside ceiling that some of the guys above them do. B-Rob is kind of a touchdown machine once they get into the red zone. It just depends on if they're going to get at the 5-yard line or closer, and then he'll get a touchdown. He doesn't get a ridiculous amount of usage outside of that. He does have some good games here and there. He has some less productive games as well. Tony Pollard's very similar production-wise to B-Rob, but he gets his production a different way, and he just scrapes by getting 12 to 14 points every single week with his receiving upside because that offense can't score worth a darn. Kareem Hunt, you could argue that he'd be higher than this, or that he could be higher than this. It doesn't really matter to me because you're starting him regardless. If you're in a standard 12-team league or format. Ramondre Stevenson, hit or miss as well. All these guys, again, decent running backs in less than ideal situations outside of, I guess, Kareem Hunt, who's just old. But you are more likely than not going to be flexing these guys at least.
Dropping down to the D tier here, we'll start with Nick Chubb playing the Chargers this week. He continues to get more work. which is good for Nick Chubb, but he does have a really tough matchup against the Chargers, who have allowed the second least amount of points to running backs this year in fantasy football. And then the guys below them, Bucky Irving, Rachaad White. We don't know which one to start. They produced equivalently last week, and it might be one or the other on any given week. They both have receiving upside. We don't know. And they play the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Chiefs have given up the least amount of points to fantasy running backs this year. And so really, it's kind of pick your choose between those two guys, whether you have one of them or both of them and you want to start one of them or both of them. I find it pretty hard to decide. I don't really love this running back room just because it is kind of they're all taking away from each other. But you do have to admit they've been producing at top 24 levels recently. So Javonte Williams plays the Ravens this week. Javonte kind of fell back down to earth after his good game, plays the Ravens. And it's a bad matchup here. They've allowed the 7th or 8th least fantasy points of two running backs of anybody this season. And then obviously you got the Vegas line only at 44.5 for this game, so not a ton of touchdowns expected. And you've seen when he doesn't score a touchdown, you don't really know. Raheem Mostert had 2 touchdowns last week, got some red zone carries, got a fair amount of carries. I think he had like 12, but plays the Bills this week. The Bills have given up the 3rd most points to running backs this year. Raheem Mostert is definitely somebody that I'm considering flexing because he is getting red zone carries now. If he continues to get red zone carries after this week, I think he's going to become a must flex in an offense that looks much better with Tua and also is potentially going to be scoring more points. It projects to be a high scoring game. 49 is the total points line for Vegas.
Yeah. F tier, you got a bunch of replacement level running backs that have been kind of pushed into lead running back roles, plus a couple committees here. Alexander Madison came down to earth in a tougher matchup against the Chiefs, which we expected. Expect him to be a little more productive this week against the Bugles, which is going to be a more friendly matchup. Guys like Chase Brown, Rico Dowdle, Austin Eckler playing behind B-Rob, but every once in a while he can get a touchdown. He's explosive in the receiving game as well. Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne, we have them this low at 34 and 35. If you have any insider information on which one is going to be the most productive running back this week, or if either of them are going to be productive at all, we would love to know. And that'll close out the F tier there.
And then we'll wrap it up with the G tier here. Tyler Algier is going to be at the top playing the Cowboys, and the Cowboys have given up a ton of points. It's a high total Vegas line. You might consider flexing Tyler Algier, but Bijan has been getting the majority of the work and getting the touchdowns there. Braylon Allen against the Texans got a touchdown last week, but he's been hit or miss. Ray Davis, kind of the same thing. You saw James Cook get the touchdowns in that offense. Zach Moss, you saw him cut back into Chase Brown's workload a little bit last week, but still not comfortable enough to really start him consistently. And then Roshan had a garbage time touchdown. You really don't know a week-to-week basis how they're going to use Roshan, but recently they've been using DeAndre Swift pretty exclusively. So let's jump over now and let's talk about wide receivers. Let's start in the S tier. This is a giant S tier for wide receivers this week for a number of reasons. Let's start with Justin Jefferson at the top. Playing the Colts, there is no ranking set out there. It shouldn't have Justin Jefferson as the wide receiver 1 this week. None. He is going to light up the Colts. I don't care about the Vegas line. Don't care about the total. I don't care about any of it. Justin Jefferson.
He's going to drop 25.
And you're starting him anyways. AJ Brown, you're starting. He has a great matchup against the Jags. 4th most points to wide receivers the Jags have given up this year. So you're starting him. CeeDee Lamb obviously had a great game in his last game, and the Cowboys still managed to lose, which is impressive. But plays the Falcons. Falcons is a good matchup because it's supposed to be really high scoring. 51.5 is the total points line. So expect a lot of points in that game and potentially some touchdown upside for CeeDee Lamb. Jamar Chase going against the Raiders here. 45.5 points is the total points line. The matchup's not great. The Raiders have been pretty good against wide receivers this year, but Jamar Chase is Jamar Chase, and I think he's going to continue to produce. He is the wide receiver 1 on the season so far. Puka Nacua jumps back up into the S tier after coming back, playing his first game, playing limited snaps, and still having 20-plus points. Plays the Seahawks, where it's a pretty good matchup, but it does project to be a fairly high-scoring game. 48.5 is the total points line. With Puka, you drafted him in the first round, second round, you're going to start him. Amon-Ra is going to be here as well. Amon-Ra playing the Packers this week. Hopefully a bounce back for him. Malik Neighbors slides down a little bit because he hasn't been producing at as high level as he was at first. He's a wide receiver 12 in the season now.
Volume's still there.
But the volume is still there. Tyreek Hill, same thing. Looked better with Tua. Still not Tyreek Hill. Is he going to be Tyreek Hill? Might be in the A tier next week if he's not this week. Drake London last year. Drake London was another guy that didn't produce as much as he has been so far. But do keep in mind, Drake London on the season is still the wide receiver 5. So even when he comes out and puts up 7.5 points, he did have 6. He had less targets in this game. A game I expected to be a little bit high scoring, but he just played the Dallas Cowboys this week, and it should be a pretty high scoring game there. So we definitely like that matchup for Drake London as well.
Yep. Then the A tier is going to be another big one as well. You've got Terry up top, who just continues to be so consistent with Jaden Daniels. It was great to see Daniels come back healthy, not miss a game. DK, we expect to be back against the Rams. He actually ended up being like a game time decision. They thought about starting him last week. I think he'll be good to go this week. Cooper Kupp Kupp, going to continue to move up as long as he's on the Rams. He is, in our opinion, the second option to Puka Nacua from a production perspective. Now, any given week, he can outproduce Puka Nacua. It just depends on if he's going to get touchdowns, if he's going to get more and more volume. We'll see. Marvin Harrison Jr. finds his way up in this tier as well. We dropped him down significantly last week. He produced against one of the tougher secondaries in the league that don't allow a ton of points to quarterbacks and wide receivers. That was good to see. It was great to see 11 targets, honestly. That is what we were missing, was that amount of volume. I know it's only 1 week. We need to see it more. We'll move him up more as we continue to see this more consistently, but it was great to see Kyler and Marv get that connection together, and I think Trey McBride being as dominant as he was really helped that as well. Tank Dell is just the last man standing in Houston. It's as simple as that. He's got to be in this tier. Devonta Smith and Brian Thomas are going to close out this tier, both guys that are consistently productive. Brian Thomas and Devonta Smith both will have, some quieter games here and there, but BTJ especially, he's just going to be all the more productive. I think now that Christian Kirk is out of that offense, it's going to be all BTJ. It's going to be all Ingram. That offense is going to look worse overall, but from a fantasy perspective, I think BTJ is going to eat.
All right, let's jump to the B tier. Let's start with Chris Olave playing the Panthers this week. Obviously, a very good matchup. You potentially get Derek Carr back this week, but Chris Olave has been a really hit or miss this season. I think you have to consider that you do need to start him still. He is a top 20 wide receiver. You have to start him, but we don't really know where he's going to produce on a week-to-week basis. Two guys here that haven't been producing that have really good matchups. DJ Moore against the Arizona Cardinals. Obviously, DJ Moore we've been really high on, and we've been incorrect about that so far, but playing the Cardinals hopefully has a bounce-back game. They're top 10 in giving up points to fantasy wide receivers. As are the Detroit Lions, and you have Jaden Reed playing the Detroit Lions, and Jaden Reed I feel like you have to start again. Obviously, we just did a video with Jaden Reed, but Jaden Reed's green all across. You got 47.5 for the total points line. It's a good matchup. They've given up the third most points to wide receivers. The offense has been very good for wide receivers as well. So Jaden Reed is a guy that, although he hasn't been producing, I feel like you got to give him a run this week in your lineups. Zay Flowers playing the Broncos. With Zay, again, it's a tough matchup. The Broncos have been the best team in the league, actually, against wide receivers for fantasy football. And then Amari Cooper, 2 spots down, playing the Miami Dolphins, who have been the second best team in the league against wide receivers in fantasy football. And T. Higgins is in between. Obviously, we're expecting T. Higgins to play, or we're projecting he's going to play when we're putting him on here. If he plays, you could probably move him even above DJ Moore, Jaden Reed, maybe, because he has been that productive when he's been on the field. But all three of these guys here, Flowers, Higgins, Cooper, all do have kind of tough matchups in terms of giving up points to fantasy wide receivers. So we'll see, but that's going to round out the B tier.
Yeah, top of the C tier is going to be Devontae Adams. He's been very disappointing this year so far, even with being reunited with Aaron Rodgers in New York. He's just not been ultra productive, not getting the volume that we want. He had like 9 targets his first game with Rodgers, 6 targets this last week. He was more productive, though, had more yards, so that was good to see. They have a better matchup, a pretty friendly matchup, honestly, against Houston, who has struggled defensively against wide receivers. I think they've allowed like the 8th most points against receivers. Now, we've got Garrett Wilson obviously ranked over Adams heading into this week, so I think the main beneficiary from a fantasy perspective will be Wilson over Adams, but that could flip. They could come closer together. We'll see. We're not going to overreact yet with Devontae Adams. Want to see a larger sample size of what Rodgers and Adams can do together while they're working on getting back on the same page. Darnell Mooney is going to continue to be in this range. He's higher up this week against Dallas. He had another great week last week against, who did they play against? Tampa. Another very productive day for him. He's going to be more boom bust, but man, doesn't matter to me. He's the wide receiver 13 on the year right now. That is definitely the high end of higher than what we expected from Darnell Mooney and what his ceiling could be. It's been awesome to see him do this. Jacoby Myers is going to continually be shorted because at this point it's just cool to ignore Jacoby Myers consistently. He had a 17-point game. He's a wide receiver 1 there. He's going to be productive. Jalen Waddle, anyone's guess what he's going to do this week. He dropped the ball that was really that could have ended up being a touchdown last week, and we'll see what he can do against Buffalo. A tougher matchup. Jordan Addison playing the Colts. Don't have to say anything else other than that.
D's tier here. Keenan Allen playing the Cardinals. Keenan continues to get targets, but he hasn't necessarily been productive with them, so I think he's a flex option. Cortland Sutton playing the Ravens. Really good matchup for Cortland Sutton. The Ravens giving up the second most points, and that secondary is a little bit banged up. So Cortland Sutton, somebody I would flex this week. Calvin Ridley, obviously coming off a big game, playing the Patriots. The Patriots have also given up a ton of points this year to wide receivers. So I think Calvin Ridley, after last week, I feel like you have to consider giving him a flex. DeAndre Hopkins playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Could be a high-scoring matchup, so we're going to keep an eye on that. But D-Hop didn't really do anything in his first week with the Chiefs. Honestly, I don't know if he will. Jackson Smith and Jigba playing the Rams. High-scoring game here, but JSN's not going to move up our rankings because, again, JSN last week, it's like, oh, he did have the most targets. I'll give him that. But he had 12 points. Like, what's his actual ceiling? He's the wide receiver 24 on the year, but mainly coming from the fact that he has been healthy all year, and a lot of wide receivers haven't, and he hasn't had his bye yet. So when you factor that in, really, he is probably trending a wide receiver 3 finish this year again. And when you're looking at last week, 13 points. I mean, that's what a wide receiver, wide receiver 2 finish.
I think he needs DK to have any chance at being ultra productive, which means he's really just a 1 of 3 in that wide receiver room, not an alpha.
And as we discussed, there's a pretty good chance DK comes back, so we're ranking him like he does. Ladd McConkey playing the Browns, another one, 5th most points to wide receivers this year, and Ladd had a pretty good game last game, so I think he's going to build on that momentum. I think these are 2 young guys that I'm really feeling comfortable starting this week if I have to in my flex spots.
Yep. Then in the F tier, we're going to have Romeo Doubs at the top. It's tough with him right now because he's had a decent last couple of weeks, but the targets have been all over the place. You've obviously got Jordan Love and his health in limbo this week. We'll see what happens there. But I mean, not one of those wide receivers in that room have been consistently productive. Not even Jaden Reed, who is consistently ranked higher than all of these guys. It just depends. Nice matchup against Detroit, though, so he will be at the top here at 36 overall. Keon Coleman looking better and better. I think Amari Cooper coming into that offense, that wide receiver room, has really helped Keon Coleman come on and start to figure it out at the NFL level, and he's producing now, which is great. Khalil Shakir as well, going to be back-to-back with him because he's reaping the benefits. Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman are going to be at the tail end of this tier. We're being conservative with really every single one of these Browns wide receivers right now because, one, David Njoku is there and can be ultra productive as well, and we got to see, can Jameis Winston maintain this success, maintain this volume, and who is really going to emerge as the alpha wide receiver there, as the top, not alpha, but like as the top option there, the most productive guy. Ben Tillman the last couple of weeks, been a result of touchdowns, honestly. Just depends. We got to see a couple more weeks here. They're both, Jeudy and Tillman, decent flex options, I think.
Yeah. Let's go to the G tier here. McMillan was okay. It wasn't like taking the production of Godwin or Evans, 9 points on 7 targets, playing 81% of snaps in that game against the Atlanta Falcons. Goes up against the Chiefs this week, though, and the Chiefs have obviously been very good so against wide receivers. So he's going to be a shakier flex. Yep. Wan'Dale Robinson playing the Commanders. Wan'Dale has kind of come back down to earth after the PPR scam we all saw, where he was getting like 10 catches on like 12 yards and getting 15 points. So Wan'Dale, I don't feel like you feel super good about that. Xavier Worthy actually had his highest targets, I think, of the season, if I'm not mistaken. He had 8 targets, I think.
Only hauled in 3.
That was tied for his highest, but again, he's only doing 3 or 4 catches per game on that because the targets are. He's still only playing 50% of snaps too. Like, Worthy is still somebody that's a shakier start, and playing the Bucs this week, it is a decent matchup. Xavier Legette has a good matchup as well, playing the Saints. They've given up the 7th most points to wide receivers. Pretty good Vegas line here. So Legette is somebody that is. I think what you'll notice about Legette, and I'm fact checking myself, is when he scores a touchdown, he scores in double digits. When he doesn't score a touchdown, he doesn't. And he's not getting literally at 3 games in double digits with touchdowns. He's touchdown dependent.
Yeah, not getting a lot of yardage with the receptions that he's got.
He's not at all. So, in fact,
red zone threat.
He's not had more. He has had 66 yards, 43, 34. Yeah. I mean, he's just a red zone threat.
Yeah.
So you're starting him if you're starting him at all for touchdown upside.
Yep. Then the H tier, you're going to have a bunch of guys that if you're flexing them, you are hurting from the bye weeks with the Niners and the Steelers this week. It's Wicks, Watson, Parker Washington, Tolbert, Michael Wilson. And then Elijah Moore, will give him his credit this week as well. He had a productive week along with the 4 other receiving options in that offense. So, again, like I said, going to be conservative with the Browns receiving core at the moment. You could see a guy like Elijah Moore move up these tiers in future weeks. Again, you're probably not comfortable flexing any of these guys at the moment.
Let's jump to tight ends now. Let's start with the S tier. Brock Bowers, Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce has been producing a lot, by the way, without Rashee Rice, so you're going to expect this to continue. Yep. Trey McBride, who plays the Chicago Bears this week, and he's also been pretty good. And then all 3 of those guys are guys that you're starting rest of the season. They're dominant, whatever. Mm-hmm. The A tier is where the action starts, in my opinion.
Yeah, the A tier is fun this week because you finally saw a ton of tight ends be productive in week 8, and I think that could carry on. Cade Otton has stormed into the top 4 tight ends of our rankings. He went nuclear last week, and I think that will continue. He was the top option for Baker Mayfield. Even if McMillan gets better, even if Trey Palmer or anyone else comes into that offense, the dude had, how many targets did he have?
10 targets in each of his last 2 games.
Yeah. you have to start Cade
You are
Otton.
absolutely starting him.
Evan Ingram is going to be pushed into a more focused role as well, with Christian Kirk being out of that offense now. He is at worst from a target volume perspective. Trevor Lawrence's second option. Lawrence loves his tight ends. He could be the first option from a target perspective this week. We'll see. He's a good tight end, obviously. Kyle Pitts, very explosive, had multiple breakaway touchdowns this week. You can't count on that every single week, but you are starting him, and he has been productive, which is good to see. David Njoku going to continue to get the volume in. He's a red zone threat. He's a target hog. Jameis is so good for that offense.
Mark Andrews, Sam Laporta have started to kind of produce a little bit. We expected a lot of them, and they hadn't done much in the first part of the season, so those can be options this week to start. Decent matchups. A good matchup for TJ Hawkinson. We're going to project him to come back, but he is going to be somebody that you have to be careful about starting because he is his first game back in that offense. We don't know how it's going to go. But Tucker Kraft, he's been kind of a touchdown guy. Got a touchdown last game. Didn't do a whole lot outside of that. Tough matchup against the Lions. We've given up at least points to tight ends this year. Dalton Kincaid, tough matchup against the Dolphins. Zach Ertz, tough matchup against the Giants. But all three are guys who have been producing. So if you have them on your teams, you're probably starting them unless you're streaming somebody better at this point.
Not going to lie, this is the most fun I've had doing tight end.
I know. It was actually entertaining.
Took 8 weeks, but this is enjoyable.
Because it was actually like productive past 9 this week.
Right. C tier, we're going to have Kmet, Ferguson, Schultz. Keep an eye on Schultz this week. Want to touch on him because Stephon Diggs out for who knows how long. At this point, at the time of us recording this video, we don't know what the injury is. They've been very hush about it. It may come out by the time this video comes out. Dalton Schultz this week, you're going to want to consider starting him because he is the second option in that offense now. Hunter Henry, Dallas Goedert, Noah Fant, all streamable options at this point. Dallas Goedert not really going to be productive unless one of A.J. Brown or Devonta Smith is out of that offense. When they're both on the field, not much volume to go around.
Jump to the quarterbacks and finish this thing up. In the S tier, Hurts, Daniels, Jackson, and Allen, all guys with rushing upside who have been very good. Hurts has the best matchup against the Jags this week. The worst matchup probably comes for Lamar Jackson. Oh, actually, Josh Allen. The Dolphins have given up the least points to quarterbacks this year in fantasy football with Lamar Jackson. The Broncos are going to have the third least points, but both these guys are starting him anyway. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and then the A tier, all your productive pocket passers plus Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray doesn't have nearly the upside that you expected from a rushing upside QB, but he still has been productive. He's been a mid QB1. Joe Burrow, Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff, all decent matchups this week that I think are every one of them is going to be productive. Baker playing the Chiefs. Actually, they've allowed a decent amount of points to, or they're right smack in the middle, the 16th number of fantasy points to quarterbacks that they've allowed this season. Baker still managed to be decently productive with no receivers remaining because Cade Otton, I guess, is an option. So that was good to see, but he'll close out the A tier here.
All these pocket passers in the B tier, all 5 of them have pretty good matchups. So we expect all of them productive. Stafford gets his receivers back. Now he's productive. Caleb Williams has been better recently. Dak Prescott has still been productive, even though they've sucked as a team. Patrick Mahomes, he actually threw for a couple touchdowns. He actually had a 20-point game, barely 20-point game, but you got to keep him up here, as well as Jordan Love playing in a high-scoring game against the Lions.
Yeah, and I will touch on Jordan Love. Just mention that we are ranking him like he would play. We're also going to rank Malik Willis, I think, in the D tier here, but the C tier, I'm going to knock that one out real quick. Geno Smith, Sam Darnold, Tua, they're all kind of hit or miss here and there. Tua is obviously really elevating that offense, but that doesn't always mean that he's going to produce because those running backs are vulturing touchdowns so consistently. And then Stroud, honestly, Stroud has been really disappointing from a production perspective. Not his fault. That offensive line is really, really bad, and Nico and Diggs are now out. It's going to be a rough one for him this week, I think, against the Jets. Bo Nix it continues to show that he has a decent amount of upside. He's playing a really, really nice matchup against the Ravens, where a lot of quarterbacks have been productive there. Jameis Winston, as well as a tougher matchup against the Chargers. We'll move him up in future weeks. This is just not a super friendly matchup. Playing Jim Harbaugh, playing that defense, I think that'll be a little difficult for him. And then I'll just close out the D tier here. I already touched on Malik Willis. Malik Willis, you are barely considering starting him if Jordan Love doesn't play. We're gonna rank him in this range if Jordan Love doesn't play. So there you go. We got both of the Packers quarterbacks here: Daniel Jones, Justin Herbert, Lawrence, Rodgers. All these guys are kind of streamable options at quarterback if you're playing in a standard 1 QB format in fantasy. If you're playing in Superflex, they're going to be rough options in your Superflex spot.
Yeah, and there you go. That's the ultimate rankings for this week. So show some love. Make sure you drop a like. Make sure you're subscribed if you play fantasy. It really helps us out at this point in the season. But we appreciate you guys. Peace out. We'll see you later.